Well, I'm going to say good afternoon. How's your day going aside from having to do media and talk to press people and talk about yourself a lot?
It's going pretty good. We just got back from about a 12-hour drive from Charlotte, North Carolina, back to South Bend, Indiana, Chicagoland, and just recovering from that. Usually 12-hour days of travel take a little bit of a toll on you, so you need a little bit of rest. And yeah, just getting ready, putting out new music. Excited to get back in the studio now that I feel recovered, and
Cool.
love talking about music. It's my favorite thing.
Sure. So Turpentine, that's the latest release, correct?
Yeah, so the last release was Turpentine. I just put out my first single of the next record, which is called "The Girl with No Tattoo," and
Hmm.
it was kind of a funky, quirky love song to
Hmm.
my wife, who has chosen no tattoos, and I think it's just an interesting choice these days because, yeah, a lot of societal pressures to conform and whatever the way it may be, and I think individuality speaks to whatever choices you may be. It's more important than ever to be an individual.
So some artists have a home recording setup. Other recording artists, they prefer to go to the studio. What's your situation like these days?
Yeah, so that's a great question because it definitely changes. Down in Charlotte, I had a what I call my road rig. It's a
Hmm.
basic setup, got a DA converter, universal audio stuff with just a basic Neumann microphone, keeping it simple on the road because you never know if it's going to be a hotel room or if it's going to be a treated room or untreated room.
Hmm.
And then when I get back to here outside Chicago, it's just a glorified closet. I love the sound of isolation, so clothes help with that and all
Sure.
sorts of like pillows and anything to dampen the sound. And then obviously with technology these days, you can make a really quiet room sound huge. It's hard to make a huge room sound quiet, so I always opt for a more dampened sound. But and then every once in a while, I do get a chance to go into the studio. We've recorded with the Bergamot in London a lot,
Hmm.
and that's always really fun to really explore a space that's been treated, and that's always great for making records because then it all sounds the same, in that vibe.
So to paraphrase what I just heard, you're not just the singer, the songwriter, the producer, but you're also engineering. That part is pretty rare. Usually people have to have a second set of outside ears.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that's really interesting about that in these days is that I have just made the commitment to try and get the best gear that I could possibly find. And then you just try
Hmm.
to treat the room the best that you can. And then you use basic rules, if like an acoustic guitar, for example, you're 12 inches from the 12th fret. It's like the 12 and 12. And
Hmm.
and then you're just looking for some basic things. I've been taught some amazing, I've worked with some incredible people along the way who've taught me some important methods of just trying to treat things acoustically. But yeah, that is part of it that there have been times where I've submitted something and somebody sends back, hey, this thing's completely out of phase. And I go back and I'm like, yeah, I did kind of miss that one. So, it leads to some errors, but I call it failing forward. I mean, as long as
Failing forward.
exactly like it's recording for me is a very intimate process. I mean, obviously because it's in a enclosed space like a closet, um,
Hmm.
but it allows you to, I think, explore spaces and creativity that you may not otherwise. Because sometimes in an environment like a studio, it feels good. But you got other people in the room. You might feel a little bit more, I don't know, just different. It might be a different vibe. But when you're in that space, you can really just go for something you think sounds ridiculous, and then you can play it back for somebody and they're like, that actually kind of sounds good. And maybe you wouldn't have come up with it if other people were in the room.
Hmm. The songs always start off on an acoustic for you.
Pretty much. I mean, I'm trained. My background is in classical guitar. I love guitar. Have always loved guitar. The study was trained under the Scovio method, which was, if any listeners out there who listen to classical music, but that was the Segovia method was a very difficult form of
Yeah.
guitar playing. It was about
Andre Segovia, I believe
isolation.
you're talking about.
Yeah, Andres Segovia, and the idea with that was his method of, and this goes maybe against the current trend in in general education, but his method was isolationism and basically embarrassment. That those were the two biggest motivators in music to make you play at your best. And I remember that, in a rehearsal, you might get called out. It might be like, hey, somebody's not playing something right, and it'd come down to like you knew it was you, but you were hoping that the teacher wouldn't hear. But I mean,
Right.
ultimately, you would have to be able to play your part, and I think that brings out really great performances in the end. But it also taught me really to think of the guitar as it's a small instrument, but it's a universe, and I really love starting there because it's my roots, and I've been playing since I was a kid.
So mentioning roots right there, doing some research on you. Said you were born in Michigan City, Indiana, which is a place, believe it or not, I've been to.
Really? I need to hear that
Cousins,
story, man.
I've cousins who were there, simply put as that. But
Wow.
that place is kind of a city that people don't realize is a city because of the shopping, the casino, etc. But where I'm going with all this is Indiana has lots of pockets of music scenes. Like I've heard about the jazz scene that's around the university. It's not Notre Dame. What's the university where the jazz scene is?
Yeah, you've got Bloomington down in Bloomington.
Bloomington. Yeah.
Yeah, and IU. There's a strong in there, and there's actually an amazing music scene at the University of Notre Dame as well. I mean, there's all these like little pockets, Michigan City, like you said there. I mean, it's not a place that you would think or put on your map as far as a place to go check out. But I mean, when you actually look at it on a map, you realize it's on the shores of Lake Michigan. It's an hour and change to Chicago. You've got the South Shore. You've got, and so like there's a lot of I don't think a lot of people think of Indiana as being close to Chicago, but when you're Northwest
Yeah.
Indiana, I mean, you're right there. I mean, obviously Bloomington's a little different, but you know, and it's a long state. So you have really interesting, then you have Indianapolis with those places. And we also had a film, and one of the cool things that we got to do with our film, and that's another interesting thing about Indiana, is that it offers the Heartland International Film Festival, which is a, you know, when we were coming up with our film, it was like that to us was Sundance. That's Indiana's Sundance. So
Sure.
to be involved in that is kind of cool and not always spoken about, but yet there's really cool stuff happening here, and it's just been fun to see it grow and evolve. I mean, my favorite Michigan City story is when I had to get my passport and I went in, and they said, "What do you do for a living?" And it was like I was like, "Oh, I'm a musician," and they were like what, like, huh? And they were like, "Wow, you made it out. Congrats!" And I just think
Yeah.
that's the type of respect they have, and also it's a community of you know, blue collar work. It's hardworking community for sure.
Yeah, so Bloomington, as you mentioned, that's where the jazz school that I couldn't think of was, and a lot
Yes,
of the Mellencamp related stuff and the Jim Irsay band kind of stuff is there. But knowing what I know about Michigan City, you actually do fly into Chicago, and then you have another casino that's in Michigan that's only somehow 15 or 20 minutes away, even though it's in Michigan and you're in Indiana. So was a lot of your musical background going to Illinois and Michigan?
absolutely. I mean, I played some shows. It was interesting just this week. So we are working together with the South Bend Symphony to put on a show in 2026, which will be our first symphonic presentation of music, which will be really cool.
Wow.
But I'm thinking back to South Bend, and my origination in music in South Bend in Michigan City was like lugging gear at an old place called Francesco's, which was an Italian restaurant. And I met the owner, and he let me play music there on Friday nights. That was my
Mhm.
start in music. And then, you know, you play your stuff in South Bend. We had a nice music scene with a couple places called the Fiddler's Hearth and other places. And then did that scene, open mic nights. And then the first thing was, when are you going to play your first show in Chicago? And if anybody is, if you're a close follower of, you know, rock and roll in Chicago, the first place to play always was Elbow Room.
Yeah.
That was the spot. So we played our first show in Elbow Room in 2000 and I think it was like 2010. And once we did that, then it was like, oh yeah, I mean, the Chicago music scene is such a it's such a hub for eclectic music from folk. You got the folk school there all the way to, you know, traditional rock and roll and punk. And so you've got all the really cool. And so it was like Chicago, spent a lot of time there, and then off to Detroit, and then up in Traverse City, they've got a really vibrant music scene, a lot of kind of that bluegrass and folk Americana history there. And it's been a fun scene to be a part of. And obviously, we travel a lot now, spend a lot of time out in Brooklyn, New York, living
Mhm.
and love that out in Greenpoint and remember those years fondly and learned a lot. But always coming back here, it's like it's our home base. We do a big show at the Morris Performing Arts Center every Christmas time, and that's a really, really fun time and a historic space to perform in.
You mentioned punk before I could. Your earlier influences, did you have the DIY and punk scene, and then you evolved into more of a singer-songwriter kind of role in existence?
Absolutely. I mean, anybody who grows up in the Midwest and doesn't hear, you know, punk and want to play some guitar, I mean, that was just about, you know, you had your skateboard, you had your guitar. That
Yeah.
was like, those were the tools of my youth. And very quickly, I learned I was not good at skateboarding. I fell a couple times, didn't break any wrists, but I was like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm going to stick with guitar for this. And, you know, I was really kind of into some punk, a little bit of like the indie rock scene. Caroline Spine was like one of these random bands
Oh
that
yeah.
Yeah, I really love them and love the guitar playing. I say this with a little bit, I get a little bit of a razz for this one, but I was a big Creed fan. I loved My Own Prison, but all specifically within that, I was a big Mark Tremonti fan. I
Hmm.
loved his ability to compose on the electric guitar. Still to this day, it's like he composed things that sometimes you just play a piece on the guitar and you think, man, this is just so it makes the guitar just sound great. Mark Tremonti was amazing at that. And so studying his stuff early on,
Hmm.
playing the entire My Own Prison, that was like the first record I played note for note, the whole thing, learned the whole thing from start to finish. And yeah, it was like I was working on a farm, saving up for guitar pedals, and that was kind of my beginnings. And then I got a little bit into the punk scene and then from there it was jam bands and I was really big in the Grateful Dead and then just from there it's just been an exploration of like how to bring those things into the current space is that's kind of the exciting part of it.
So Creed to me is endlessly fascinating because I remember they were a smaller band, then they became an arena band, then they became everybody's punchline in a way, and then you
Exactly.
kind of had like Scott Stapp's fledgling career where he wound up on
Acting.
TMZ, and Alter Bridge was like a theater band at best, and then suddenly they get back together. And it's the biggest places that they've ever played, the most expensive tickets. Everything sells out immediately, and everyone loves Creed again. And it's kind of the same thing with Limp Bizkit, who they feuded with. And you
Yep.
go, how did you go from joke to more popular than you've ever been without doing new music?
And it's an interesting point you bring up too. I mean, a lot of people ask me, so like, this gets into some, musical stuff that I grew up with, but like, it was like, were you Pink Floyd or were you the Beatles? And it was like, if you like the Beatles, you may not like Pink Floyd. You may never, or if you loved Pink Floyd, in my case, I did, you may not have liked the Beatles. And I think that like back then it was like you had these like riffs, and I still get chided from my good friend who is a music buff and introduced me to a lot of music, but he always laughs that it was my first record I gave him was a Creed record. But it was like that was like back then it was like you had these feuds, you had these like it was like here, this camp or this camp, and but it was kind of fun. Music was in that way. I thought it was a cool thing to be able to, enjoy music and you didn't have to listen to everything. You just found your niche. And it's been fun to see some of these bands come back. Like you said, they've been on these interesting journeys and but yet still tied to there's some real musical profoundness to
Mhm.
their stuff and it's fun to see them kind of come back and explore and just get back to their roots. It's like, yeah, you see all these crazy things that happen in today's world, but just getting back to hearing like Mark Tremonti on the guitar, he's a legend in my mind. And I know that it, like you said, it was a punchline for a long time, but still good stuff. I mean, you hear the stuff that he wrote and it's like
Yeah.
these are that's good stuff. You cannot deny it. You cannot deny it that on that front.
I'm not denying it. So down to the last few questions before I let you go. The first one, you talked about how The Girl with No Tattoo is the new single and it's from a forthcoming record. Do you know what the timeline for the new record and related touring and all that is?
Yeah. So I'm putting together the record. It's been I did not imagine the girl with no tattoo is gonna have as good of a response as it does. I think as an indie musician, you just never know. And you
Hmm.
put stuff out there. So it's definitely pushed some things up. I'm thinking new record sometime this year, probably late summer. I always love summer releases because that's when I usually listen to a lot of music and I'm in a good frame of mind.
Hmm.
And so thinking about that and then probably shows sometime, if not later this year. We've got a lot of shows coming up with the Bergama and touring and stuff like that. And so I'm looking next year, just playing some solo shows. I mean, I think any indie artist, it's the real thing right now is like putting together things that make sense in a world that's constantly not making any more sense than you can make of it. Trying
Right.
to put things that a date here, a date here. So definitely stay tuned. But new music, I already put out the next single is just an acoustic guitar and a voice, a little bit more Bob Dylan folky influence and so leaning into that, but definitely something by the end of the year with the new album, thinking about what that name will be and all those fun things that once you get the first single out and it's got some traction now, it's fun to think about what that full release could look like.
Got it. Kind of a stock question, but genuinely curious. Do you have a favorite song to play live from your catalog?
The Turpentine song is probably one of the better songs that I feel like I composed on the electric guitar. I really love it. It's a moving,
Hmm.
melodic composition with some melody going on in the vocals as well. And so
Hmm.
that's one of my favorite songs to play. It was written at the height of quarantine and all that, so I was spending a lot of time on the guitar, which is my passion. But in today's world, you get mixed up a lot. But it was good to be in that time. I love playing that song. And it's just fun to play. That's the key at the end of the day. It keeps me agile on the fretboard, and at the same time thinking about the lyrics and putting my melody out there in the right notes.
Well said. So, last question. You as a fan, what's the last concert that you went to for enjoyment, not because you were coming up for a guest spot or a harmony vocal or that kind of a thing?
Yeah, so I'm a big classical buff. But the last concert that I went to, actually, this is crazy, was Chris Bodie, down in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was a wonderful concert. Chris Bodie is an amazing talent. My dad loved Pink Floyd and smooth jazz, so go figure that one out. But I grew up with a lot of Chris Bodie, and Grammy winner. It was really cool to meet him. Unbelievably sweet personality, and a little Chicago connection here. So we got talking about Polish in outside of Chicago, the Polish connection, and he said his number one fan base was in Poland. So we had a
Hmm.
great connection, great conversation, unbelievably talented. And it was an intimate space, less than 300. So it was really cool to see him do his thing, and tremendous respect for his work and his career. And hey, anybody can make it that long in music. That's a beautiful, beautiful thing. You're speaking the right notes, and that's key.
Right. So to sum up what I've learned today, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, there's new music coming soon, hopefully later this year. There's more touring coming.
Yep.
We can't easily pigeonhole you to a city, state, or genre. And regardless of what the music sounds like, you take a DIY punk rock approach because it's you writing it, performing it, engineering it with some outside opinions occasionally, and so forth. And more or less, we don't know what to expect, but we should love it if we love the prior stuff. Anything I'm missing
Absolutely.
there?
No, and I mean the only thing is that we're also working on a film. We put out our first film in 2023, and now we're still filming, and we got totally random, but we got caught in Hurricane Helene. We put out a YouTube video that went to the number one trending video on YouTube for 48 hours. So we're
Hmm.
working on videos as well. So it's just the career is definitely in the focus of my life. All the other like living arrangements and everything else seem to fall to the side, and we do the best we can. But I'm still smiling, so I'm all right with it.
Well, thank you for all that and looking forward to what's to come, Nathaniel.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity, and it was great talking to you. Hope to talk again soon.
Paltrocast.